everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today, well tomorrow, but today we're going to play again with Dharma's Fiber Reactive Ice Dye line that I played with once before. But this time we're going to play around with it on some plant-based fibers. The main yarn for today is Knitpicks Lindy Chain. This yarn is 70% linen, 30% Pima cotton, and it has a chain ply construction. Our plan is a pretty simple one. I'm gonna pre-soak the yarn, probably first with water, and then I'll add some soda ash to it. And then we're gonna add speckles of these ice dye colors to see how they break with cotton. And I'm figuring of the two colors I have, I'll do one each of those colors, one on each skein. And then I also have a skein of Knitpicks Dishy in white that we'll use and maybe use both of the colors in some capacity on it. So I'm gonna go ahead and pre-soak all three of these skeins overnight.
To prepare the yarn for dyeing, we need to soak it in a soda ash solution to raise the pH. Now, a lot of metrics I see say to use 1 cup of soda ash in 1 gallon of water. So I'm going to try using a 1/4 cup of soda ash in 4 cups of hot tap water. Now, because we were using a dry powder, I am wearing my Deluxe Fiber respirator mask, safety glasses, and gloves. I'm doing my best to dissolve the soda ash. I don't know how well it will dissolve here. But see, unlike dyeing wool yarn with vinegar, I just don't have a good feel of the proportions yet. And I already set up like an ice dyeing project with t-shirts, and there I just sprinkled on. I just sprinkled on the soda ash on top of everything. But okay, I'm going to take our linen blend yarns and pop these in. Notice how yellow the other water got? Oh my goodness. I want these ones to have the priority over this solution. I know the volume is small, but I'm hoping it should be okay. Okay, and this is our Dishy. So when we're going to start speckling, we will squeeze out the excess liquid that is in here. I know that this volume is really small, not really enough to cover everything, but I'm going to hope we're okay because we'd squeeze out a lot of the liquid anyway. So let me actually put the linen guys on the bottom and the other friend on top. Okay, but we'll wait, I don't know, 15 minutes or so before we go ahead and try to speckle on here.
I could have watched my own project from the first time I speckled on cotton with Fiber Reactive Dyes, but you know, I didn't.
Okay, here's what we're gonna do. This white skein, I don't know what my plan was before, but it's gonna be our yarn mop. Any excess dye on my hands, the dye on the counter is gonna go there. And then let me squeeze out the first skein we're gonna speckle on. I have a steamer basket ready to go. I'm gonna wanna make sure my gloved hands are, well, I should spread it out first, Rebecca. Okay, because we're gonna just speckle on this in a very simple-ish kind of way. That's the plan. That is the plan. Okay. I don't remember what I just said I was going to start with, but we're going to start with Dragon's Heart, which is the more green-based of the colors. And I'm taking this dye a lot heavier than I might if this were wool. I know the colors are going to spread. That's what cotton does. And presumably linen. But I've also learned from experience that when dyeing cotton, you need way more pigment than you think. So one of my goals is to tell if this breaks with speckling. And I have to say, things don't look extraordinarily broken at the moment. Let's take our yarn mop and wipe this color on. I mean, that's a really pretty green. So when I look for breaking with specklings, I'm looking for a separation of the various pigments. I'm looking for tiny little dots that are different colors. Now, I'm about to zoom you in because I do see breaking, but not from each individual patch. I feel like that is a good spot to showcase the breaking that I do see. You see green at the center and a turquoise halo around it. That's because whatever those yellow pigments are, I think those are striking to the yarn first. And then the blues, well, nothing is striking this fast, but the blues are spreading more than the other green pigments, which is giving us that halo. But let's go ahead and wait 5 minutes. I'll leave the camera at this view, and then we'll see if things may or may not look different when we wait.
It's been 5 minutes. I feel like things have spread out, but I'll have to take a look. Yeah, probably definitely spread out. I mean, I would say that there are definitely some little patches that are more blue on the overall yarn, but I'm not seeing some of the other notes that were in the swatch, some of those more brown notes. So this is very interesting, and I'm very, very curious where those come from. But now I'm gonna flip over the yarn and speckle the other side. Now I could use the yarn, move the yarn more to try to get more color onto the inside of some of these areas, but I think that the color is gonna spread. And so, especially like when I move it, like if I pick it up and dab, oh, not as much movement as I thought. Let me inspect. You know, I'm fairly happy with it. We can always like pick up a little bit off the counter. Maybe that's not doing anything. Okay, let's go ahead and just steam it. I'm gonna steam that for 30 minutes. And then I'm gonna bring over our yarn mop to wipe off this dye off of the counter. Now ooh, I see a little bit of a brown note there. I wonder if some of those brown notes dissolve later. And so maybe we don't see it now, but we might see it when we go ahead and wash the yarn, or like remove the yarn from the steamer basket. I'm gonna steam the yarn for 30 minutes. I will wipe down this counter to try to remove the green colors before we go ahead and start speckling on the other one. But I'll wait until there's about 10-15 minutes left on the timer before we start doing the next speckle round. I waited until there was around 10 minutes left on the timer for the first yarn we're steaming to go ahead and set the yarn out to prepare for the second round of speckling, mainly because I don't want both yarns in the pot at the same time. I don't want them to touch each other as much as possible. There may be some, quote, cross-contamination at some point, but the goal is to keep things separate.
Okay, let's do this. Okay, this is the Alchemist, which also can have some brown notes, but I wonder if that has to do with like the dye not spreading. It could have something to do maybe with like the time or the exposure to say soda ash. But this is super interesting to me, because just wait till you see the t-shirts that I did. And yeah, I guess I don't know a lot about the chemistry involved with these dyes. I mean, I'm assuming that there are a mix of colors that break differently, that dissolve at different rates, and that bind to the yarn at different rates. But the difference between doing this kind of technique, where the dyes aren't going to move very much and will sort of bind where they are, and ooh, that color is so pretty. I mean, I do see breaking here when I use it. I've seen there's purple notes and blue notes, but the question is if we're going to see that in these speckles or not. I'm picking a spot to come back to in 5 minutes. But I'm seeing the same kind of thing as last time, mostly dark blue with a turquoise halo. I don't currently see any red specks, but this could just mean that the colors are really well milled, so really well mixed together. I'll see you in 5.
5 minutes later. Okay, there is the very occasional red speck in here. But I feel like I saw more the time I ice dyed with sock blanks. I do see some red speckles. They're just very few and far between. But what's really interesting is over here on the yarn mop. Because from wiping my gloves, we can see there's a little bit of red in there from that color. But there's also, where did it go? Haha, here. This is also from the Alchemist, but we have a little bit of brown. Some of that could have been from the green, but there's definitely, after doing the Alchemist on here, I noticed some brown notes that I hadn't seen before. And so that's just really interesting to me. But now I just need to pop my respirator mask back on and flip and speckle the other side, and then we'll wait 5 minutes before putting this one in the steamer basket.
I still have my mask on, but, ooh, I see some brown notes now. Oh, I do see some browns. I see a lot more breaking than I saw before. It's very subtle though. Okay, I'm gonna set this into a steam pan. I see one rogue, like purple speck. That could be from cross-contamination between the Alchemist and this other green, because I've used them side by side. Soon we'll be bringing over the other color, but I do just want to quickly wipe out the steamer basket. I'm not seeing a lot of color, but it was just in case. Oh, and the water below is pink from a completely different project. I thought I was going to wait 5 minutes. Really been more like 2, but I'm going to go ahead and put this in the steamer basket very carefully. We'll steam that for 30 minutes, and then we'll bring over this yarn to work on cleaning up the counter. Ooh, we're getting lots of purples, and what's interesting is that this color seems to be staining my work surface a little bit more than the other one, which is surprising me a bit. Now, I have a feeling there's not that much dye on here, but I do think it's really pretty and fun. It's probably going to end up way lighter than this because colors will rinse out. But I don't really want to add more color because I kind of am digging this like pastel tie-dye thing. So I'm going to set this aside. As soon as we're done steam setting the Lindy chain that I just dyed, we'll go ahead and steam set this for 30 minutes. And now I'm going to focus on cleaning up a bit.
Okie dokie, artichoke. Ooh, I see some bigger red patches in there that you can see from up there. And, you know, there are some brown notes. I see that within the blue, but look, there's a big red spot. Yeah, we'll take a closer look, obviously, once everything is dry. And I know I'm gonna need to wash things individually. Hopefully the fact that there isn't that much dye will be in our favor. This guy, I'll probably wash off camera, but I'll pop in if there's anything notable. 30 minutes on the clock. I decided to start washing each of our speckled skeins separately. At least at first, maybe I would combine them after a little bit. But with fiber reactive dyes on plant-based yarn, there is always going to be some excess dye to rinse out. So I started using hot tap water, adding soap to our rinse bath immediately because I found that helps prevent some back staining or when the dye bleeds out and then binds to the pastel areas of the yarn. There was a surprising amount of bleeding for how little color there was on the yarn. If this happened while I was dyeing wool yarn with acid dyes, I would be pretty worried and upset. But on cotton, again, this is normal. Fiber reactive dyes under basic conditions with soda ash can react with water in a way that then they can no longer bind to your yarn. And so that's what we're rinsing out. And that's why you need to use a lot more dye when you're dyeing cotton than you would when you dye wool, because you can use 100% of the dye onto your wool fibers. All the bleeding resolved really quickly, but the one big observation I had is that the blue pigments that we had from the Alchemist colorway, the blue and purple feeling we had there, feels way more green and way more similar to the Dragon Heart than it did when I first applied the dye onto the yarn. So I don't know if it's the heat or the washing, but I noticed this color shift before I really started washing the yarn. But hey, there's another experiment that we can do to play around with this. We could do ice dyes on a t-shirt, steam set one, and let the other sit overnight, and then compare the results as a variation of the heat versus time versus acid that I did so many years ago. But speaking of t-shirts, I mentioned I did some ice dyeing on some shirts, so let's go take a look at how that project turned out. Now I actually have a bonus project I would like to do. Let's quickly dye up some t-shirts. These are ice dyes, so I thought it would be fun to do some ice dyeing on t-shirts because my kids need shirts for camp anyway. So I took my dollar store basket, and I think it's technically a kitty litter pan, outside. I layered one t-shirt on the bottom because I'm curious what any color dripping through might do. I figured that would be fun. And then I scrunched up the shirts that I had. They're still dry. I added on some rubber bands and then layered ice on top of them. And then on each shirt, I focused mostly one color of the ice dye, one on one shirt, one on the other, because I'm curious if we're going to see something that looked more like those original images versus what I saw on a sock blank when I did ice dyeing in the past. I figured that this would be a really fun way to contrast with what we're going to see by speckling with these dyes onto yarn, and I cannot wait to see how this turns out. About an hour after I set everything up, there's tons of color down below, making me really happy that I cut the bottoms off of those containers. But I think I'm gonna add some more soda ash. It only took a couple of hours for all of the ice to melt. And I did notice that there was still a little bit of powder up on the surface of the shirts, but you can see those brownish orange patches way more clearly on these shirts, on this fabric, than we could see on the yarn, but I used way more dye. And so maybe it's a quantity thing. I took the scrunched t-shirts out of the basket, put those into some Ziploc containers so that way they wouldn't dry out, and we could let it sit for a few days to let all of that color really absorb. After a few days, I brought our shirts in one at a time to start rinsing out the dye. And you'll notice that there is way, way more bleeding that we have here than what we had in our yarn. But also I used way, 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 way more dye. I'm really happy that these shirts turned out pretty saturated. I feel like when I'm using fiber reactive dyes, I never use enough dye or soda ash. I need to just play around with it more to get a better feel for the proportions, because I'm used to using less is more when dyeing wool, but wool soaks up color so incredibly easily. I rinsed out the shirts in my sink until the color got pretty light, and then I put all of them together into my washing machine and washed it 2 times before drying the shirts. And I'll show you those in a second. You know, I did not label which yarn was which, and that was not a mistake. I can tell which one of these I dyed with Dragon whatever and which one I dyed with Alchemist, but they look way more similar in the speckles than I expected. And right here they are nearly indistinguishable. This is our Dragon Heart. It is more green. This is our Alchemist. It has a little pops of pink in here and is more blue overall, but speckled onto yarn is not where these colors shine. They shine with the ice dyeing on fabric. I am so glad I set up these shirts as almost an afterthought, and I'm so glad, because these look like those swatch pictures that we had. And sure, they both have turquoise in them, so they are adjacent, and you can see here where we have a little bit of Alchemist that got on this one. But they are dramatically different, and there's way more contrast here than what we see in the speckled yarns. Since cotton, linen, and other cellulose fibers absorb color a lot slower than wool, and you need a lot more dye to get similar levels of pigment, speckles aren't as dramatic on cotton. Now, we do have some incredibly dramatic speckling on the t-shirts where dye powder sat on them and didn't melt or dissolve into the water, where that powder sat on the shirts for days, certainly over a long weekend. And I think I need to do some more exploration, specifically some side-by-side of letting a t-shirt, say, sit outside for a couple of days versus steam setting it for 30 minutes. Because if I had taken these yarns, left the dye on them, and waited a couple of days, would the color be more intense? The last time I did this comparison was many years ago. I was using one-step tulip tie-dye kits. And so I feel like I've learned a lot since then, and it's worth revisiting that on something that can give us maybe more dramatic and visual results, like fabric. But I still don't know quite how I do it and know that I had the same amount of dye or similar amounts of dye, you know? So I'll have to think about that a lot more, but I do think that that comparison is worthwhile to explore. As we admire these ice-dyed shirts, I would like to give a huge shout out and thank you to the ChemKnits Fiber patrons, including Jessica Parco, Don Jans, Bernadette Crum, Tamara Svanas, and the rest of the names you see on the screen right now. Patreon is a great platform that connects content creators with fans, and it's a way that you can support the content that I share here directly. And in exchange, I offer fun perks, such as early access to the newest Dyepot PS video, and patrons also vote for the direction of that video. And then there's a lot of other cool perks as well. If you want to learn more, you could head over to patreon.com/ChemKnits. Depending on the level, you can get shout outs in videos, access to behind the scenes live stream, and even permanent ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop coupons. Patrons, thank you so much for all of your support. There was one other shirt that I dyed that I used sort of on the bottom of all the ice dyeing, and this one came out so cool as well. When I removed it, and I believe I showed that clip, it looked like it was going to mostly be a solid color because it had spent the weekend soaking in the runoff from the ice dyeing that we did. But the time and some things that bind quicker and the concentration that the dyes are in make a difference in how it patterned onto the t-shirt. And so even mostly uncrinkled, the way that the ice melted and the colors slowly spread from the edges more to the center really did create a fun pattern on this shirt. And I'm excited to play around with ice dyeing more in the future. I just think that it is a lot more dramatic on cotton than wool, which is really nice to say because a lot of times when I dye cotton, I feel like wool is more dramatic in yarn terms. So it's really exciting to have these differences here. There's one last skein of yarn that I dyed, our yarn mop, and I'm a little underwhelmed, which makes me sad because I loved the way it looked wet. Because this was a pure white, we have some gorgeous speckles that pop, but a lot of it feels slightly more stained versus intentionally dyed. And don't get me wrong, it's a beautiful neutral, it's fun, I think it'll knit up really pretty as a pastel. I just wish that it had maintained some of that color that I saw before, and I knew it wouldn't, because that's what happens with cotton. It looks way darker when wet than it does dry. And I just have more to learn, and I truly don't dye cotton enough. But one of these days, I want to get super vibrant cotton yarn using fiber reactive dyes. And I don't think I've quite ever nailed it. Maybe we've been close at times, but this summer, I want to do better. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and watching my videos and engaging with the content is by far the biggest thing you can do to help support all of the content here. Patreon is a wonderful bonus. Buying things in my shop is also a wonderful bonus. But I wouldn't be able to do any of this if you didn't enjoy my videos. So I really appreciate it, and I love getting your suggestions and feedback because over the years, the way I play with color keeps evolving, and I'm excited to see where we go more. Thank you so much for watching.